We know that the audience really likes right-left panels, and we decided to have a discussion here on Breaking Points about college for all. So we brought in the executive director of American Compass, Oren Cass, and Freddie Deboer. He's the author of The Cult of Smart, and he's got the Freddie Deboer Substack. So we encourage everybody to go and check those out. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Nice to see you guys.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Oren, I mean, the impetus for this segment is you guys put out a statement over at American Compass about College for All. Kind of break that down, both about what you put out and give us, kind of the case against why that's a good idea.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for mentioning that. We've kind of been doing two things, I think, that have come together on the topic. One is a lot of work on just asking, what is the purpose of public education? It feels to us like in recent decades, we've come up with this mindset that the whole point of public education is to get everybody into college and, then into some job that requires a college degree in ways that I think just harmed most students, most families, most communities. And so on the one hand, reminding people we really have to actually ask that question, what is this for? And then looking at the data on how our current system is working. The reality is that a very small fraction of students are actually successfully going high school to college to career. Most fall out somewhere along that pipeline, and outcomes for them are just not very good. So I think the time is really right, and I think most people are really recognizing the time is right to rethink what is this all for? What are we trying to do here?
Freddie, just react to that and lay out your viewpoint a bit, because I think part of the obsession, the neoliberal obsession with education, college education in particular, it kind of glosses over a whole host of other societal ills. And it puts it back in the personal response. Well, if you just try hard enough, if you just get that college degree, if you just take on those tens of thousands of dollars of debt that are going to be with you for a lifetime, then everything will be good in society. So what is your view here?
Well, yeah, I'm also opposed to college for all for a variety of reasons. The simplest is simply economic. In 2007, the National Bureau of Economic Research put out a paper, which I think is kind of under-discussed. It's by Claudia Golden and Oren Cass, and it looked at from 1890 to 2005, so a really nice, big, robust data set of what influences the college wage premium over time. So the amount that a college graduate makes relative to someone without a college degree. And they found that it's a product of supply and demand. In other words, it's a question of a ratio between the number of jobs that require a college degree and the number of people who are actually getting college degrees. And to quote a specific sentence, overall simple supply and demand specifications do a remarkable job explaining the long-run evolution of the college wage premium. I mean, that just makes sense, right? I mean, you sell labor on a market, and within that market, you're always going to be constrained by supply and demand issues. So if we push more and more and more people into the pipeline, inevitably you're going to find that there are gluts of people who have the degree, and the premium that we're trying to get these people is going to be eroded further down. I don't think that it's only that the educational benefits are only a matter of scarcity, but I do think that everybody is always going to be running against this fire hose of people we're trying to shove into the system over time as that goes on. And as Oren said, of course, the other side of this is that not everybody has the same skills or abilities, and it's perverse to try to reward our system as if they do. So one of the consequences of this intense push from the policy level. So in my book, I point out that every president since at least Ronald Reagan has named college as being a key or the key to solving our economic problems. One of the consequences is that we have had a remarkable reduction in high school graduation rates over time, to the point where, for example, in 25 years, for example, among Hispanic students, the high school dropout rate has been cut to a quarter of what it once was. I mean, that probably sounds like good news, but the problem is there's no underlying educational data to justify that. In other words, if you're having all these people graduating from high school who didn't before, you would expect that would come, because of some sort of underlying growth in educational outcomes. But the SAT data doesn't show it. The NAEP data doesn't show it. None of the state standardized tests data show it. So in other words, we're forcing people through the pipeline. All the policy pressure resulted in people getting graduated out who were not ready. What then happens? Well, one of the sort of quiet stories in higher education right now is that remediation costs in community colleges have exploded because all these students who are graduating high school who should not have are showing up at community colleges without the skills they need. So it puts tremendous pressure on all elements of the system to try to force people into a pipeline that was never designed to be for everybody.
That's really well said. You know, Oren, from a New Right perspective, from your organization perspective, how are you guys thinking about this on a policy level? What should people do about this, so to speak?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right question. And what it comes down to is we have to move our resources. I mean, we spend literally hundreds of billions of dollars a year in public funding on this college pipeline. And yet, if you look kind of across the street and ask, what are we doing for someone who's not college bound or not going to succeed in college? The answer is essentially nothing. And so we need to change that in two respects. One part is we need to really invest in building alternative pathways. We need to say, yeah, look, some kids want to go to college, are going to succeed in college. We should certainly have high school courses that help prepare them for that. But we have at least as much obligation to have high school courses and ultimately entire pathways that prepare people for a different route, for getting them into the workforce sooner, connecting them with employers, getting them job skills, so that we say, look, if you want to head toward that bachelor's degree at age 22, okay, but also here's an option that gets you to age 20 with 3 years of job experience, a relevant credential, and by the way, earnings in the bank instead of what you might have spent, and we can do that. Right. And most countries do. I think one thing that's so fascinating is to understand what an outlier America is. If you look at the OECD data, most developed countries have kind of 35 to 55% of their high school students on these kinds of other pathways. And then OECD, actually, they have a footnote. They say, sorry, we had to leave the US out of our data set because the US just has absolutely nothing comparable that we could even count. So building that is one half of it, but just to make one more quick point, taking some of that resourcing away from higher education also has to be part of it, because the reality is we've sort of set up what I call this amusement park entitlement that says from age 18 to 22, you get to go to college and hang out on the quad and tailgate and whatever, and maybe there are these enrichment courses on the side. Try telling a 17-year-old, regardless of what's in their best academic or economic interest, no, you don't get to do that. We really need to make what being in college looks like a lot more like what not being in college looks like, and just give all young people a more realistic and sort of equitable experience that's going to help focus them on actually preparing for adulthood.
Yeah.
What do you think of that, Freddie? Because, I mean, from a policy perspective, I actually don't know what your position is. I personally think we should have free public college. I think we should have I think we should have widely available apprenticeships. I think we should have free trade school. I think we should have free community college so that people, obviously, coming out of high school are able to obtain the skills in whatever direction actually suits their personality and their skill set to be able to, exist and function in the working world. What is your view of that, and what is your response to what Oren had to say?
I mean, I think the kernel of my book, if you wanted to break it down to the one individual sort of thought that was most playing on my mind when I devised my book and when I decided to write it, was the sense that there's many more ways to be a loser in 21st century America than there are to be a winner. That we have a profoundly narrow sort of sense of what it means to be someone who is living a life that is enviable or that is sort of respectable. I often, when I talk about these things in the promo for my book, for example, there's a lot of people who sort of look back to NAFTA and they look back to globalization and say, well, this is the problem, that we undercut the manufacturing center, we undercut the unions, et cetera. I think that's a complicated conversation. It is not true that we don't make things in the United States anymore. In fact, we make more stuff in the United States than we ever had before. But because of automation, because of technological growth, we just need to employ far fewer people. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. We're not going back to a pre-NAFTA, pre-WTO, whatever world. That's just not realistic. And if we did, our economy would contract to the point where it would be, self-defeating. But I do think that there does have to be a real effort to make people understand that the trades are a big capacious thing. I mean, I'm always hesitant to just say we need to push people into the trades, because what the trades mean in terms of the lifestyle lived by someone within that is so big and so varied that it's not actually like, oh, the trades will save us, right? So the trades can mean being a unionized mason in Manhattan and making $150,000 a year, or the trades can be being an ununionized mason in Phoenix, Arizona, making $40K a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't want to be too bold about saying, oh, the trades will solve everything. But the reality is that there has to be like multiple streams through which we can get people to that life that is considered not to be a loser, right? We have to have outs that are not academic outs in order to sort of push people along the pipeline. Other countries do this pretty well, right? So Germany famously has a multi-tiered educational system where, depending, somewhere around 13, you get put onto a track or another for an academic track or to go into the trades. Now, tracking is profoundly controversial in the United States, in part because there are racial dimensions that are less salient in Germany, but it's also, Germany has powerful trade unions who can ensure that people who go into these trades, if you go and you work at BMW, you're going to have better material conditions than you will in the United States at this stage in many professions. But there's also not this sort of baked in like trade school is for the losers, and we have to change that culture. And unfortunately, that has to start at the bottom, and it's really hard to get people out of the sort of college for everyone mindset. I mean, I spent years and years in working in K through 12 schools and in various capacities, and I was amazed that third grade teachers would be telling their kids, you got to go to college someday. So you have this entire pathway through the education system in which the relentless message is, if you don't end up in college, right, then you have failed in some profound way. So there has to be structural changes. There has to be better funding for trade schools. There has to be a willingness to consider the possibility that not everyone needs to take Algebra 2, et cetera. But also there has to be a cultural dimension where we recognize the equivalent dignity of all different kinds of work. And there are opportunities, I think, in the trades out there. But even that, again, the fastest growing sector in the American economy is not the trades broadly defined. It's also not STEM, which a lot of people think. It's the service economy, service sector economy. And that is, again, a set of jobs that many people consider low class or low status. And so to get people to take other options seriously, we have to be able to sort of confront the way in which we mark certain professions as being inherently lacking in dignity.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I mean, Oren, let me just push you a bit, because I've been, I feel like everybody has always recognized, oh, we need job retraining. And anybody I hear that, it's almost become like a meme online about, oh, well, just retrain, and then the retraining never actually happens. What does that look like in practice? These actual retraining, apprenticeship style programs, investments, is it government directed, state? I mean, what would I actually be looking at physically if this were to actually materialize as a real thing?
I think, one thing to say is that retraining is very hard, because you're talking about folks much later in life in a career, as opposed to helping people when they are still in their earlier educational years and kind of getting off on the right track. I think what people have found in general, even with retraining, and this certainly goes for the kinds of reforms we're talking about here, it all comes down to connection with the employer. If you can get somebody connected to an actual job that exists in the real world with an employer who wants an employee, and have that employer be in the driver's seat in training the employee to do the job, that's when it tends to work. When it doesn't work is when you have a government program that says, we're going to turn this kind of worker into that kind of worker. Let's get everybody into a community college, teach them how to do this thing, and then trust that the jobs will be there. So really putting the employer at the center of the process, I think, is key. I want to take issue with just one thing that Freddie said, and in the context of kind of being very concrete about what this could look like. Tracking isn't actually controversial in America. This is something I find fascinating. Tracking is controversial with a certain sort of narrow segment of the progressive elite that sees it as sort of constraining of opportunity. But this is one of the key things we asked about in our Failing on Purpose survey at American Compass, we gave what I think is a very clear, fairly worded description, and it's all on the site exactly how we asked it. Which of these things do you prefer? A sort of essentially single track program that tries to get everybody in the same academically intensive courses versus tracking, acknowledging that people are going to be on different pathways, headed toward different endpoints, and that we need to do that in high school. And tracking was more popular literally by 10 to 1. In the middle class, it was 95% to 5%. And that people prefer tracking. We even, for fun, we asked half the sample using the word tracking, and half the sample we used the phrase diverse pathways, which is somehow supposed to be more fashionable. People couldn't care less. It is common sense, and it's because it's people's lived experience at this point that there is no alternative to tracking unless you're going to get everybody an individual tutor. No matter what, we are going to have tracks. The problem with our current system is we only have one track. It is a track designed for the upper middle class. It is working for a very small segment of the population, and everybody else is left behind. So there's no question we need to get political leaders more comfortable understanding that they can say this, because it's not only true, it's popular. There's no question we have to confront, the folks at The Atlantic who write endless articles calling tracking, the new segregation, when it's, of course, exactly lower income and often non-white families and kids who are most left behind by this system and have the most to gain by getting more options. And so what that looks like in practice is you say, look, we have all this money we spend sending kids off to leafy college campuses. That's an institution that makes sense for some people as they transition to adulthood. For most people, the institution that's best equipped to help people transition to a productive career is an employer. And so we should be willing to say, look, essentially call somebody a trainee, which is a definition just like a college student. It's somebody who's spending time on the job, it's spending time in formal training. And an employer who takes on a trainee should get the same $10,000 a year that we give to a college campus to take on a student. And if you did that, now the first thing a lot of employers would do is they would turn around and ask community colleges to set up the right formal training programs. But then the community college's customer wouldn't be the 18-year-old who doesn't know what he wants. It would be the employer who knows exactly what he wants. And I think that's, again, much more the sorts of systems that Freddie's describing in other countries that work well. That's what we have to do here. But it means getting comfortable with the idea of tracking, the idea that people are going to be on different pathways, have different aptitudes, getting comfortable with the idea that employers have to play a role. And then last thing I'd say, because this is something I agree with Freddie very strongly on, is a cultural point, getting comfortable with the idea that being on a non-college track and headed off to some career that's not in management consulting in New York City isn't losing, right? Like a huge part of the argument against tracking is, what if there's some kid out there who could have gone to an Ivy League school and then become a management consultant who instead ends up being, a very successful general contractor and leader in their own community? Like, oh my gosh, our upward mobility and equal opportunity are broken. And that's just not true. And that is part of the mindset that we need to get out of and recognize that the whole point of public education is communities investing in their own young people, preparing them to take on the burdens of carrying forward the prosperity of that community. And that's what we should be asking our schools to do.
Well, and this is a deeper problem with a society that basically only values people according to their market value and what the market says that they're ultimately worth. Freddie, I'd love for you to respond to that point, but I also want to hear your thoughts on the student debt cancellation debate. Because part of why I support some level of student debt cancellation is because a lot of these kids were sold a bill of goods. I mean, Oren's got numbers here that are really interesting about how fewer than 1 in 5 students actually go from high school to college to career. Half of those who even go to college never complete a degree. So you have a lot of people who had it forced on them, like, college is the only worthy avenue. If you don't go to college, you're a failure. This is the only way you can succeed in the world. And it just ultimately wasn't the right path for them. And now they're saddled with all of this debt for their entire lifetimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think to begin with, just the reason why I favor some form of college for a variety of reasons. But of some sort of college debt loan forgiveness is because we have to acknowledge that a huge portion of that loan debt is never going to be paid back no matter what. Like, what people are going to die with a ton of this debt. If you look at the numbers, there's just a huge number of people who have a debt where there's no realistic way in which they will ever pay it back. And so, like, the government is going to eat that debt in one way or the other. The question is, like, when and how humanely can we make that happen? But I just think that if we're going to attack the college affordability crisis, again, like, I think people underestimate the degree to which, we think about college as kids who go to elite schools and they spend 4 years there and it's far from home and they are getting a liberal arts education, etc. Most college students go to colleges that accept essentially every student that applies. Okay, so it's quite rare for colleges to reject more students than they accept. They are going to school. The primary number one reason, far and away, is for the school they choose is location. Okay, so something like, I haven't looked at the number in a little while, but something like 80% of college students go to school within 30 miles of where they grow up. So they're not shopping; they're just going to the local school that they can get into, and they spend a lot of their first couple of years remediating the stuff they should have learned in high school, and that's a big part of the reason why many of them take 5 or 6 or plus years to graduate. And so what the upper middle class kids have, right, is college is like this broader thing, which is an opportunity to spend a few years figuring out who they are and what they want to do, right? And they're able to do it because they're subsidized by their parents. They're able to figure out, who am I? What am I actually good at? Where do I want to apply myself? They are often, or almost always, those kind of kids still on their parents' health insurance in that period. If you look at low-income students, they're paying everything out of their pocket, or they're taking on loan debt. That loan aid will run out eventually, and what happens for a fair number of students is that they just literally run out of federal student relief, student aid, so that they can't continue their education. And they have to work at the same time, often in the hopes that the work will give them meaningful health insurance. I mean, many colleges you can get some sort of health coverage, but it's not actually health coverage in any meaningful sense. Well, I want people of all income bands to have that period to find where they need to go in the economy, where they can be productive and contribute for the best of everyone, right? But in order to do that, you have to sort of give them the affordances of being able to figure things out, right? The employer-sponsored healthcare system that we have is a big part of the problem here, because they don't feel that they have the latitude to move jobs or to figure themselves out, because they're not going to have health insurance if they're not working for an employer who offers it. But then finally, and I think this is super important, is we just have to get off the credentialing treadmill. Okay, like so many people feel pressed to go to college because they feel like it's a requirement to get a good job now, and in many places it is, right? But if you look at a graph of the amount of master's degrees that are held in this country, it is astonishing. The growth in the number of people with master's degrees is absolutely astonishing. The universities love them because they're big cash cows, and these are people who are working in jobs where there's no intrinsic reason for them to need that degree, but what they do need is a way to distinguish themselves against the rising hordes of people with BAs. That if we just keep shoving more people into the college pipeline, the college diploma will become like the high school diploma, right? In which case it's just a thing that you have to have, and it no longer confers a meaningful wage advantage. And so at some point, employers have to ask and say, okay, does this sort of entry-level white-collar job, working for Nationwide Insurance or to be a bank teller at Wells Fargo, whatever, all these jobs that are sort of these low-level white-collar jobs or pink-collar jobs, do they really need the college degree? Because usually when they go looking for the college degree, they're just using it as a signaling mechanism to say, okay, this person could get out of bed and go to class and do their homework, and they have those kind of soft skills, and that's what's really valuable to us. But that is a hideously inefficient system if you're actually thinking that what you're in college to do is to get that education. So until there is a willingness by employers to say, you know what, we don't need all the, everyone who works for us to have a BA. You're going to have all this pressure on the system. If we can sort of bring down, say, okay, you know what, not all jobs need a BA. Some colleges will end up closing. I mean, I think that's inevitable in the next 50 years anyway. But there's got to be a sense that not everybody has to have that particular piece of paper.
Yeah, I think this has been very, very, very good for the audience. I've personally learned a lot. We're gonna have links in the description to books, the polls, the Substacks, all of that where they can find you guys. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah,
Thanks.
this was great. Thanks.
See you, gents. Man, that was awesome, Krystal. We should do that more often.
Yeah, indeed.
It's
Great
difficult,
thinkers.
logistically difficult, but man, it is awesome. I always learn a lot. Thank you guys so much for watching. We really appreciate it. I mean, we've been mentioning this week. It's just such a reminder, Krystal. You know, literally while we were doing this show, multiple other artists are coming out on Spotify. The New York Times, Roxanne Gay now is boycotting Spotify. All of these people, huge boycotts that are being led. And look, it's only a matter of time, in my opinion, until something gives way somewhere. We'll see. Already other artists are apparently recruiting Taylor Swift. It's just a reminder. They could come at us anytime. The only way we survive with full knowledge and we don't censor ourselves is you guys through our premium subscription. So thank you so much for all of you who show up for us every day, who support us in the way that you do, because, you know, watching these things cascade through popular culture, it is a warning. It's a warning shot across the bow at folks like us. We will continue to say whatever the hell we want. Don't worry about that. But the only way we're able to is because of you. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. We love you. We got some great content for you posting this weekend, so make sure you stay tuned and check that out when it drops. And we'll see you guys back here on Monday. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.